Next, we have Cardi Chang, who is the Chief Engineer at DLNR, the Department of Land and Natural Resources for the state of Hawaii, who will explain about the state's role in advancing geothermal development here. Thank you, Cardi.
Thank you, Guy. Guy asked us to do a short presentation on the department's role. I thought it was a good opportunity to share some of the things that we've been involved with. And over the last year and a half or so, we've been approached by members of the public, other agencies, and potential developers who are trying to just kind of navigate their way through the permitting process, the land issues, and a number of other issues. So we felt that this we wanted to share some of the, at least from our perspective, our role with respect to the permitting process. And hopefully after this, I can answer some questions that you may have on that. First of all, I'm with the Department of Land and Natural Resources. I'm Chief Engineer. A little bit about our department, DLNR. It involves over 10 programs. Many are recreational or resource-based. The primary mission of the department is to protect and conserve Hawaii's natural, historic, and cultural resources. The engineering division is one of many divisions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the engineering division's role with respect to geothermal. Our function in the engineering division is that we are the engineering arm of the department. We serve as the project managers for most of the capital improvement projects. We have close to 100 facilities that involve state parks, small boat harbors, trail systems, and so forth. We regulate 140 earthen dams. We also provide technical assistance to the county with respect to the National Flood Insurance Program and other flood control matters. And lastly, we play a role in the geothermal regulation and resource management, which I'm going to focus on today. The department has several authorities that may be involved with geothermal resource management. I'll go over each one briefly. 6E, if there's any type of exploration or development that impacts any historic properties or burials or any archaeological sites. Our State Historic Preservation Office has authority within our department to comment on those impacts. 171, if state lands are involved and surface leases are needed. 171 authorized the issuance of surface leases for state lands. 182, because mineral rights are reserved to the state, Chapter 182 authorized the issuance of mining leases for the production and development of the minerals. 183C, if development or any type of activity occurs within the conservation district, which is one of 4 land use districts, others being agricultural, rural, or urban, our department would need to issue a conservation district use permit. 195D is administered by our Forestry and Wildlife Division, and it addresses impacts to flora and fauna. 196D, in the event there is, in the future, a large-scale development geothermal cable project that does transport energy from island to island, there are statutes on the books that address facilitating the permit process and also fostering relationships between various departments to kind of streamline that process. The purpose of our program is basically resource management, and we regulate the exploration, development, and production of geothermal resources and byproducts on state or reserved lands. Reserved lands means any lands that the mineral rights are reserved to the state, which include private lands as well. with 4 components: to prevent waste, provide optimum use of the resources, protect the environment, and there's also a public safety component to protect life and property. As I mentioned earlier, mineral rights are reserved to the state of Hawaii, and includes all geothermal resources under fast lands or submerged lands. The state's jurisdiction extends seaward from the certified shoreline 3 miles down. So any type of resource found under state submerged lands would also fall under our department's purview. Because mineral rights are reserved to the state, any type of mining operation is going to require a mining lease for development. Some of the permits and approvals you're going to need from our department, if you want to explore, whether it be non-invasive or invasive exploration, exploratory wells would need to come to the department for an exploration permit. You need to present to us a proposed plan of exploration before our department can issue a permit. If any type of activity involves the disposition of a surface lease, you would need to come to the department to get a surface lease under Chapter 171. Any type of geothermal development is going to require issuance of a mining lease. And a function of that mining lease is what we call plan of operations. It may be called a plan of utilization in other states, but basically this plan of operation is essentially citing all your infrastructure, your well sites, your water supply, and so forth of a geothermal plant operation. Any type of well drilling, production well drilling, modification, abandonment of wells will also need a permit. Royalty payments, this was kind of talked about a little bit in the previous discussions, but royalty payments do come to the state. It's based on a percentage of gross proceeds from the sale of electricity. The state, our department retains 50% of the royalties, 30% goes to the county that the development occurs in, and 20% goes to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. In the event the action occurs within the conservation districts, our department has authority to issue a conservation district use permit, or what we call a CDUP. Our Department of State Historic Preservation Office also addresses impacts to burials, historic sites, or archaeological sites as well. This chart illustrates a general overview of not just the department's permits, but some other permits as well as it relates to resource management, land use, and health and safety. It starts at the top. You see DLNR is actually the Board of Land and Natural Resources, which is a 7-member board appointed by the governor, sets policy for the department. Exploration permits, mining leases, and the plan of operations will need to be approved by our Board of Land and Natural Resources. Land use approvals that would be needed under conservation lands. That authority for conservation land permits would fall under the Board of Land and Natural Resources. Outside of the conservation districts, it falls under the county. So any type of development, agricultural, rural, or urban, would be, you need to go to the respective counties for a permit. Administrative permits are more ministerial in nature. Our department would issue well drilling, well modification, well abandonment permits as long as the plan of operation was approved at one point in time by the board. These other ministerial type of permits can be administratively approved. Our Department of Health has authority to regulate noise, ambient air, and other type of permits related to public health and safety. And at the county level, you have your normal grading, grubbing, building, electrical, and plumbing permits. This is just related to land use and resource management and health and safety. There's other state agencies, such as the Public Utilities Commissions, that do get involved in approving PPAs and so forth, that is not part of this, but this is just a general overview of some of the permits required. Recent legislation is about this past legislation. Some of you may have heard about Act 97. what this does was a pretty significant piece of legislation that was signed into law just in April of this year. One of the most significant things it did was to remove the provisions in law that designates the need to designate geothermal resource subzones. Geothermal resource subzones were designated at one point in time, and you could only do development within these subzones. On Maui, the only subzone designated was the Haleakala Southwest Rift Zone, which encompasses about 4,100 acres. In the Kilauea East Rift Zone, the only designations were about 20,000 acres within the Kilauea East Rift Zone. So prior to this past session, this is the only areas that development could occur. To designate a subzone, you have to go through a process that required public hearings, community outreach, and so forth, which could take a year or sometimes even longer. So as I mentioned earlier, Act 97 repealed the subzone provisions, these three sections of state law. It also provided for some definitions, specific definitions regarding the differences between geothermal exploration and geothermal resource development. This was important because prior to that, it was sort of bunched into geothermal activity, which includes both exploration, production, and development. So this allows it, by differentiating between the two different phases, there's clearly different impacts of each phase. So it allows us as a regulatory agency to regulate each phase differently. It also, because from a land use perspective, was designation of subzones removed, the legislation also provided in all four land use districts as geothermal as a permissible use. So because there's no subzones anymore, geothermal development is allowable and or permissible in any of the four land use districts. I just want to mention on the previous slide that although it's a permissible activity, it's still subject to all the number of permits that I kind of went over, as well as most of the people are not familiar with NEPA process on the mainland. In Hawaii, it's called HEPA or Chapter 343. So any type of activity is still subject to going through the environmental review process, and full EISs are going to be required prior to any development project. Anyway, but what is the department? I think you heard. What are we doing, to move the program forward? Right now, I think the legislature has been kind to the department within the last 2 years. Prior to this, the geothermal program actually had been abolished. So the legislature had provided funding to hire or bring back the mineral resources program. We're currently hiring for these four positions: a new geologist, engineer, a planner, and a secretary. As we speak, with the recruitments are actually, for a couple of they're actually out right now. So once we're able to build a staff, we're able to respond to developers a lot, more efficiently. I think you heard Don Thomas's name come up quite a bit in the past one. He works for the University of Hawaii Center for the Study of Active Volcanoes. He got some federal money to do some non-invasive exploration. We'll work with him to partner as a regulatory agency, and also some of the royalty payments that we do get are going toward possibly matching some of the funding that he got for this. Basically, like I mentioned, he's going to do some studies on Maui, certain areas of the Big Island, and possibly Oahu. Our administrative rules, which is done back in the 1980s or so, early 80s, we're recognizing that it's somewhat obsolete, antiquated, and there's a lot of ambiguity still in our rules. So we're looking through our administrative rules. We're going to be updating them eventually to make it consistent with the current statute. And just as recently as last year, Act 97 has already made our administrative rules somewhat obsolete. So we're going to be updating that within the next year or two. Also, we've been working with our colleagues at the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism to kind of look through our rules, our statutes, and so forth to identify where there's gaps. I think from developers that have approached us to say, it's somewhat complicated, the process, the permitting process. And one of the things that do want to talk about is that the mining lease process is typically by a public auction. This does not bode well when a developer wants to come in and explore, spend money, but at the same time may not be assured that they may be getting a mining lease because from a public land standpoint, our fiduciary duty is to make public lands available for everyone. So we're taking a look at the current process now, how we issue mining leases, and then we're going to possibly suggest some changes, to our authorities as well. But those are just some of the few things I've been working on to address some of the issues that we've been talking to a lot of people about. But other than that, that's all I have to present. I'm here to answer questions as best I can. Right?
Thank you again very much, Cardi, and thank you for bringing up questions. We'll be reserving the questions and answer session at the very end after all the speakers are done.